At long last, we can begin our evolution content. Now, evolution is probably one of the most misunderstood concepts in the entirety of biology, which is a shame because it's also one of the most important concepts in all of biology. So let's begin by dispelling a few evolution myths. Evolution is not the process by which organisms become more human-like over time. This was a very popular idea in a lot of movies and sci-fi TV shows for a while, where we went, about 200 million years into the future, and there was a race of human-like dogs walking around, bipedal dogs that talk and all.
If the hadrosaur had continued to evolve over the last 65 million years, extrapolate the most probable appearance.
Extrapolation complete.
Display life form.
No, evolution does not cause things to become more human-like over time. Humans are a very highly evolved organism, yes, but a lobster is also a highly evolved organism. An oak tree is also a highly evolved organism, and neither of those two organisms are becoming more human-like over time. Evolution goes in any possible direction that it can get a foothold. Anything that works, that's a sound evolutionary design. So organisms change over time, but they do not necessarily resemble humans more and more over time. Okay, let's get the language correct as well. Genes. Individual segments of DNA which code for particular proteins, and different kinds of proteins will give you different traits in the adult organisms. Genes mutate. Mutation arises from replication errors, where you should have had an ATG at one particular codon, but instead you ended up with an ACG. Those little tweaks to the amino acids of a polypeptide will cause different traits to emerge. So individual organisms, individuals, have traits. And those traits vary. There's a wide diversity of traits on display. You just look around at the people in our classroom. You have people of different heights, you have people of different shapes, you have people with freckles and other people with no freckles, people with brown hair, people with blonde hair, people with black hair. We have every possible set of traits possible that we could look at here. So individuals have traits, and those traits are different for different individuals in the population. There's variation in the population. Individuals with those traits compete. Imagine you're living out in the wilderness, right? Every day is a struggle to survive. What do you need to survive? You need fresh water. You need food. You need shelter, so space. You need warmth. You need all kinds of resources. If you want to pass your genes on to the next generation so that you are not the dead end of your particular genetic line, well, then you're also going to need a mate. All of these things require competition. Other organisms are going to want the things that you can eat for food. So you're going to have to compete with other organisms to get your food, right? Any acorn that a squirrel eats is an acorn that you can't eat. If you have to compete with other members of your species for mates in order to reproduce, you have to compete with every other organism in the ecosystem in order to get space. So space is a resource to compete with. There's all kinds of ways that organisms have to compete in order to survive. Now, if you are a very, very good competitor, you can spend less of your time worrying about all of these resources, and you can spend more of your time reproducing, eating food, being very, very healthy, and watching after your offspring. So, those individuals with the traits that make them the best competitors are going to have something of a reproductive advantage. Evolution is all about reproduction. And the idea is that those individuals that are the best competitors, those with the traits that make them better competitors, they're going to have a statistical advantage where it comes to reproduction. If they make more offspring than the other individuals that they're competing against, then the next generation is going to resemble them more than it does their brother, their sister, their cousin, their friend, etc., etc. So, individuals have traits, individuals compete, individuals reproduce, And those that reproduce very successfully, we say that they are selected. You may have heard the term natural selection before. What it really is talking about which organisms are the best at making babies, which organisms are the best at putting more of their genes into the gene pool of the next generation. So individuals are selected, but populations evolve. An individual cannot evolve. If you have an individual evolving, that is not the word of evolution according to biology. That is the word of evolution according to Pokemon, where you start out with one organism and then over a period of time they change into something entirely different, right? Pikachu turns into... I don't know. I don't know this one. Anyway, populations evolve. What is a population? A population is a group of organisms of the same species that are interacting with each other in the same point in time. So it's a reproductively active group of individuals of a species. So I can look into my backyard and I can see a population of oak trees right now. I can see a population of squirrels. That is the individuals that are competing with each other and have the genes which will be showing up in the next generation's gene pool. Now, some of those individuals are going to have more success. They're going to have more offspring than others, and it's likely due to what traits they originally had. That'll give them a statistical advantage. So populations evolve. Now, what does this term mean, evolve? Well, evolve kind of just means to change, but we're talking about a specific type of change occurring. A change in how common certain types of traits are, certain types of genes are. Let's say that you have a population and some of the members of the population are really, really big. They have the trait for being big. Other members of the population are very, very small. So you have a variation in that trait there. Now let's say that a new group of predators shows up and they think that the big ones are very easy targets. So they disproportionately attack and hunt the large ones. Meanwhile, the small members of the population, they can scurry away and they can hide. Well, after all the big ones have been eliminated, the only reproducers left are the small ones. So the next generation will have more genes for smallness than they do for largeness. And therefore the population as a whole, from one generation to the next, will have changed what the ratio of genes are. We'll have more small genes than we did before. That's what evolution means. It's a shift in the frequency of genes in a population over time. And eventually, if these things shift enough, if there's enough mutation and enough selection and enough evolution, you can end up going from having one species and divide that population into two different species. And we'll talk about how that can happen as well. On my slide here, I have a small sample of a population of organisms which are called side-blotched lizards. You can see that there's three different traits on display here. We have the orange-bearded one on the left, we have the blue-bearded one in the middle, and then we have this one on the right-hand side that is called the yellow-bearded one. Now, each one of these colors, yes, it's a different trait, but it's actually also associated with a different behavior that these organisms have. The orange ones are a little bit more aggressive. They tend to fight off other males when they see them. And their strategy for reproduction is to defend a large territory with lots of females in it. So they're constantly going around and making sure that no other males are trying to come into their territory. The yellow ones here on the right, they're sneaky. They like to try to sneak into the orange male's territory and steal one of the females or mate with one of the females while they're not looking in order to pass their genes on to the next generation kind of in secret there. Meanwhile, these blue ones in the center, they're monogamous. They choose just one female to mate with, and then they concentrate all of their effort on protecting that one female and making sure that those offspring are going to be very, very well cared for. So three different strategies. PBS Digital Studios did a fantastic episode on this phenomenon on their series called Deep Look, and I'll put a link in the doobly-doo and I'll add it to this playlist so you can watch that as well. But the point here is that we have 3 different traits and 3 different reproductive strategies competing with each other. Now, it turns out that these ones are in perfect balance. But if for some reason one of these males were to get an advantage over the other, say the blue ones are more successful in a few generations than the orange and the yellow ones were, well then suddenly most of the population would become blue as a result. So the population would change over time, and that's an evolutionary process.